You are not tired. You've tested that theory already. Sleep didn't fix it. A break didn't fix it. Success didn't fix it. So stop calling it fatigue. Fatigue improves with rest. This doesn't. This is something else. You wake up functional, not energized, not broken either, just operational. You move through your day without resistance. You answer what needs answering. You do what needs doing. You even do it well. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. That's the problem. Because if something were visibly wrong, you'd be allowed to stop. You'd be allowed to question. You'd be allowed to change. But you're not falling apart. You're holding together. And holding together is far more exhausting than falling apart ever was. You keep telling yourself this is normal, that this is what adulthood feels like, that everyone is tired. That's true, but not in the way you mean it. Everyone is tired from effort. You are tired from division, from carrying two versions of yourself at the same time. The one that acts and the one that watches. The one that speaks and the one that edits. The one that nods and the one that silently disagrees. You don't feel dramatic pain. You feel constant moderation. You don't collapse. You compress. And compression generates heat. That heat is what you call exhaustion. You didn't lose motivation. You redirected it. Away from honesty, toward manageability. At some point, you learned which parts of you were acceptable and which parts created friction. You didn't kill the unacceptable parts. That would have been honest. You simply stopped consulting them. You became efficient. You learned how to respond instead of react, how to choose words instead of truths, how to keep conversations smooth. You learned that being easy to deal with earns safety, approval, predictability. So you adapted, quietly. You didn't wake up one day and decide to betray yourself. You made a series of reasonable adjustments, small ones, harmless ones, the kind no one warns you about. You said yes when no would have complicated things. You stayed quiet when speaking would have required energy you didn't have. You played along because resistance felt expensive. Each time, you told yourself it didn't matter. And each time, something learned where it stood. Not everything inside you gets equal authority. Some parts speak. Some parts wait. Some parts stop trying altogether. You still think of yourself as one person. You're not. You're a negotiated settlement, a truce between who you are and who you've learned is tolerable. That truce is what's draining you, because it requires constant enforcement. You have to monitor tone, monitor timing, monitor reactions. You have to anticipate what version of yourself the room expects, and you are very good at it. That's why no one worries about you. You show up on time, you deliver, you smile at the right moments. You don't ask for much, you don't make scenes, you're reliable, which means no one sees the cost, not even you most days. You call it being mature, or being realistic, or not overthinking things. But notice this: when you finally get a moment alone, truly alone, with nothing demanding performance, you don't feel relief. You feel empty, not peaceful, empty. Because the version of you that relaxes isn't the version of you that's alive. You've optimized for functioning, not for coherence. You can do things. You can achieve things. You can even feel moments of satisfaction, but you can't fully inhabit them. There's always a distance, like watching your own life through glass. That distance isn't depression, it's dissociation with good posture. You didn't disappear, you stepped back, just enough to keep everything running. And now you live slightly behind your own eyes. You sense it in small ways, in how compliments don't land, in how milestones feel flat, in how you finish something you wanted for years and feel nothing. You tell yourself you'll feel it later. You rarely do, because the part of you that wanted it is no longer in charge. You replaced desire with strategy. Strategy works. Desire costs. Desire wants things that don't fit neatly into plans. So you downgraded. You learn to want what makes sense, what's defensible, what sounds reasonable when explained. You became fluent in justification and very quiet about grief. Grief for the conversations you didn't have, the risks you calculated away, the versions of yourself that never got a trial run. You don't mourn them openly. You barely acknowledge them, but they didn't vanish. They went underground, and underground pressure builds. That pressure doesn't explode. It leaks. It leaks into irritability, into numb scrolling, into the feeling that time is passing faster than it should. It leaks into the strange resentment you feel toward people who seem reckless with their honesty. People who say things you would never allow yourself to say. You tell yourself they're immature. What you mean is, they're undivided. They don't carry the same internal committee. They don't vote on every sentence. You do. And the voting never stops. That's why rest doesn't work. You can lie down, but the negotiations continue. You can take time off, but the monitoring doesn't stop. You can meditate, exercise, optimize your diet, and still feel like you're carrying weight you can't put down. Because the weight isn't workload, it's alignment. You are misaligned with yourself. Not catastrophically, precisely. Just enough to be sustainable. Just enough to be invisible. That's the most dangerous configuration. If you were deeply unhappy, you'd be forced to change. If you were deeply fulfilled, you wouldn't need to. But you're neither. You're functional. And functionality is an excellent hiding place. You tell yourself this is adulthood, that idealism fades, that compromise is wisdom. Some of that is true, but here's what you don't say out loud. You didn't just compromise outcomes, you compromised perception. You trained yourself not to notice certain internal signals, the ones that said, "This matters to me. This feels wrong. This is costing me something." You didn't silence them aggressively. You just stopped asking follow-up questions. And they learned. They learned that speaking up leads nowhere. So they speak less, until silence feels normal. That silence is not peace. It's compliance turned inward. You are obedient to a life you didn't fully choose. Not because someone forced you, but because you kept choosing the option that required the least friction. And now, friction feels like danger. Truth feels disruptive. Even to you. Especially to you. You sense there's a conversation you've been postponing. Not with someone else. With yourself. You keep saying, later. After this phase. After this obligation. After things settle. They never settle. They stabilize. Stability is not resolution. It's suspended motion. You are suspended, held in place by routines, roles, expectations. None of them evil, none of them malicious, just heavy. And you're tired of carrying them while pretending they're weightless. You wonder sometimes if this is all there is. You immediately dismiss the thought. Too dramatic, too ungrateful, too risky. But notice how quickly it appears. Notice how familiar it feels. That question isn't a crisis. It's a signal. And you've trained yourself to ignore signals. You are very good at that. That's how you survived. But survival and integrity are not the same thing. You can survive almost anything. Integrity is far more fragile. It requires participation. And you've been half present for a long time. Not absent. Divided. Part of you performing life. Part of you observing it. Part of you waiting for permission to re-enter. Permission never comes. No one grants it. Because no one took it from you. You handed it over slowly, voluntarily, responsibly. That's why this doesn't feel like tragedy. It feels like maintenance. But maintenance done indefinitely becomes erosion. You're not breaking down, you're thinning. And thinning is harder to notice than collapse. Until one day you realize you don't know which version of yourself is speaking anymore. The one who believes what they're saying, or the one who knows exactly why they're saying it. And if you stay very still right now, if you stop adjusting the answer in your head, if you don't rush to make this useful or optimistic, you might feel the exact point where those two versions stopped overlapping. Not when it happened, just where it is now. That gap, that quiet, persistent gap you keep stepping over, as if it won't eventually widen into something you can't ignore. As if division doesn't always demand a reckoning. As if you can keep living split like this without one side eventually asking,